Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counselors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counselors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hi, I'm Rory and welcome to episode 315 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm delighted to catch up again with Ellie Finch, who is an accrediting member of the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy. She's a professional member of the Association of Counselling and Therapy Online, we know as ACTO. She's a registered member of Social Work England, has a postgraduate diploma in integrative counselling and psychotherapy, a master's in social work, a BA honours in social anthropology, and an advanced certificate in online and telephone counselling. Today, Ellie is going to talk about using digital tools in an online environment. Really exciting. And with that said, let's get on with today's episode.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Very warm welcome to episode 315 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with Rory Oakes and myself, Ken Kelly. 3 topics today, starting off with ethical, sustainable practice, where we're going to be diving and swimming in the pool that is neurodivergent-affirming psychotherapy. We then go into our Practice Matter section. That's the CPD section of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, where there is an interview with Ellie Finch, as Rory has kind of beautifully introduced. So we're going to be speaking about using digital tools in online therapy sessions. And then make sure you stick around to the end, because it's student services, where we recognise you, our students, on your formal journey. And I guess we're all eternal scholars when we become counsellors and psychotherapists. We're going to be talking about something that is important to all, and that's developing an emotional vocabulary. And it can be used as a counselling skill once we understand how to discuss and name emotions. So we're going to be diving deep into that. But starting us off, Rory, what would neurodivergence-affirming psychotherapy be? That's a lot of big words and maybe new for some.
It is, and I was glad I wasn't asked to spell them because
Yes.
I would have probably got them wrong. But what we're saying really, I mean, I think if we look at the term affirming, first of all, affirming can mean different things, but in this context, what it means is that we are understanding that some people are neurodivergent. In other words, that they could be autistic, or they could have ADHD, or any of the presentations that fall under that neurodivergence umbrella. That could be someone having Tourette's, somebody who may be transgender, although I have to say the evidence that neurodivergence and autism is a little bit up in the air at the moment. There's no definitive evidence. And it means that we are accepting of people in our therapy room. And there's a lot of talk about, EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion. And I guess people who are neurodivergent, and if we talk about one specific area, people who are autistic come to the therapy room, they deserve the reasonable adjustments and the care and the thought that anybody else who was a minority, if you like, would expect. So part of that is that we we understand, we do the work to make sure we understand what neurodivergence is and how we can best support those who are neurodivergent, especially, and we'll probably talk a bit more about this, those who are autistic.
Thank you, Rory. Beautiful introduction to a really important topic. I'm excited about this topic. If you listened last week, you'll have heard me hinting about it. Rory and myself, for well over a year now, have been really deep diving into the topic of specifically autism, as you said, Rory, autism and counselling, how that comes together, what that looks like, what we can do as practitioners. And on the back of creating a really deep dive course that we're about to launch very, very soon in Counselling Tutor. Just go to counsellingtutor.com and you'll get the info there of when we launch that. We've decided to focus on this really important topic. We know there's a hunger in counselling and psychotherapy within our niche, within our sector, for information on this topic, both from an agency perspective, but also from individual practitioner perspective. And I think I'd like to start as we kind of introduce this topic, speaking about the wording, because it was purpose that the topic of today is neurodivergence-affirming psychotherapy. And like you say, Rory, big words, difficult to spell. I wouldn't like to give it being neurodivergent myself and dyslexia falling beautifully under that umbrella. I can happily say that and own that I wouldn't be able to spell that easily. But I think language is a great starting point. Why are we using a word neurodivergence? Is that not a word that kind of sets somebody apart from being, I don't know, it's an interesting word. What's the thinking behind that, Rory?
Well, I think, first of all, I think we have to acknowledge that the world of autism and neurodivergence is one that is developing. So the language we use today may not be the language we use in the future, because this is such an emerging profession, and an emerging cohort of people. They may eventually decide on their own terminology, but we have to use the terminology that gives us a common currency in therapy. So by using the word neurodivergent, what we're really saying is that everybody is neurodiverse. In other words, we all think differently. We all have our own phenomenology. But people who are neurodivergent are different from the norm. And I'm using different with a very, very small d. So that difference could be sensory processing issues, sounds, lights, that type of thing. Ways of connecting to the world. So, some people who are neurodivergent can get very overwhelmed if they're in very noisy environments, or textures, or tastes. And also, I think when we talk about neurodivergence, we're really talking about how people communicate, because with some neurodivergent people, they have different ways of communicating. And I'll give you a really good example of that. I have a grandson who is autistic, and he is nonverbal, and he's the best pointer to things in the world. He can communicate quite easily by using his finger and pointing at everything. And unless we understand how to meet that cohort of clients where they are, then two things are going to happen. We're going to miss them. In other words, we're not going to be able to make a therapeutic relationship. And even worse than that, they may not attend therapy because they don't feel understood. So that is why we use that language of neurodivergent.
Thank you, Rory. Yes, and I guess as we kind of look at the language, we recognize that as professionals, as counselors, as psychotherapists, we need a language that is commonly understood to be the correct language of the time. And I like how you mentioned that the way we talk about things, the way we name things, the way we describe things does change over time. There was a time where the word Asperger's would be used in diagnosis within the United Kingdom. That is no longer the case. That word has now been dropped. There was at one time ASD, or autistic spectrum disorder, was a common term that might be used professionally, and it has fallen out of favor, specifically because it has the word disorder bolted onto the end of that. And well, the question is it a disorder, or is it just a differentness or a different otherness of way of being? And when we speak about neurodiversity, neuro meaning neurons, the part that makes up, I guess, the processing of our brain, diversity meaning the plethora of difference that is, I guess, present within the world. We all think differently. We all kind of maybe have a different phenomenology of how we see and interact and perceive the world. So neurodiversity is the full spectrum of all people. We are all within that spectrum of neurodiversity. So when we hear the term divergence usually is it's a scientific word that suggests that something is off-center, it diverges, it is not bob-on in the middle. So neurodivergence, I guess, is the term that is professionally accepted at the moment as being an otherness, as opposed to neurotypical, which is used as the typical neurology or way of thinking, or how the brain processes. Neurodivergence is slightly off from that. It doesn't mean it's worse. It doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's a disorder. It just means that it is a difference. And you often say, Rory, and I know you mentioned it in the course, it's like saying what's better, a Mac or a PC. They both kind of do more or less the same thing, but they do work on two completely different operating systems. But one is not necessarily better than the other, although people will... we're going to have a lot of letters on that one.
that's another podcast. And
it is.
Bag of letters, Ken.
But the point here is that we need a language that is commonly accepted, that kind of we can all understand and speak about, and wording that we can use professionally. But we also recognize, and I think this is really important, that within the neurodivergent community, there are those that will own their own terms and their own way of speaking about who they are and how they show up. And my daughter is autistic, and she likes to call herself neurospicy. You know, I've been on forums for neurodivergent individuals, because I myself am neurodivergent, and I've seen people who say, no, that is not a good way to refer to it, neurospicy, but that fits for her, and that's her ownership. And I think it's an interesting time. But of course, language is really important, specifically as professionals, particularly if we're doing research or writing about this topic, or studying or looking deep into this topic. We need to understand the right language of the time. But like you say, Rory, it's a moving feast, as they say. It's changing all the time. And it's interesting when you read the most up-to-date books, They usually start off by having a big disclaimer saying, you know, the language in this book may change as time goes on. Yeah, so that's my thinking really on that, on the language that we use. And I guess, Rory, why is it an important time now to be looking into neurodivergence as a counselor, as a psychotherapist? Yes, I hear that you say that it's an otherness that we cannot ignore, but it seems all of a sudden, I'm going to be honest with you, it seems like it's now the volume has certainly gone up on autism, ADHD, and neurodivergence in general.
Yes, and I think there's probably a couple of reasons for that. I think that neurodivergence it has been around for years. Certainly, I've been dyslexic for as long as I've been alive, and I'm 66. So this isn't a new phenomenon. But I do think that people now are beginning to gather together. I think one of the great strengths of the internet is it can bring communities together. People who may have just been sitting at their computer saying, do you know, is it me, or is anybody else see the world as I see it? And all of a sudden, we realise that we're not alone, and there's a whole group of people who are just, and I'm going to be a bit controversial here, wired up differently. Our neurology works in a different way. And you actually said it beautifully, Ken. You know, there are some people out there that are PCs. There are some people that are out there that are Macs, and there are some people that run on completely different operating systems. And once we understand that it's all right to run on a different operating system. I mean, I run a Mac. Some people use Microsoft. Other people use different operating systems. But the crucial thing here is that we acknowledge there are different operating systems, that people think and experience the world in different ways. And this isn't really new if we think about it. Everybody who ever studies counselling has studied phenomenology, the philosophy of lived experience. So why now? I think that we're finding more people are beginning to, first of all, understand that their way of being and their way of viewing the world, they're not alone. There's a whole group of people out there. And also, I think, and I think very strongly about this, is that traditional psychiatry hasn't done the neurodivergent community any favours, because for a lot of the time, people who are neurodivergent were given labels such as personality disorder or given other kind of psychiatric diagnoses, when really what they are is just experiencing the world differently. And because that world hasn't taken the chance to adapt to them, they get distressed. And when they get distressed, then they may become unwell. I mean, it's not unusual for people who are autistic to have a meltdown. And that is because maybe the world they're in isn't adapted to them. And a good example of that is if I take my grandson to the supermarket, it's very, very noisy. He gets very distressed. He puts his fingers in his ears and he can't get out there quick enough. And supermarkets now have quiet shopping days. So you can go in, it's nice and quiet. They turn the music off. They ask people to be respectful and quiet. So people who have that kind of phenomenological view of the world can shop in relative safety and peace. It doesn't make difference to anybody else. I don't like supermarket music anyway. And they can get on with their lives. So it's about being respectful, and it's about understanding that people run, as we say, to use the analogy of computers, on a different operating system, and that we have to adapt to their operating system to be able to help them.
Yes. I'm looking forward to getting into that part of this topic of why it's important to us and why we should be looking at it. And, you know, with that why now question, I think you answered that beautifully. And what we're seeing, you know, the internet definitely has given so many more people a voice. It has also given so many more people access to information that may have been hidden before. And also there's been a lot of research. There's been a lot of looking at neurodivergence and a lot of new understanding and a new understanding of the past and the misdiagnosis, as you've spoken about, Rory. It has come to its time, I guess, where individuals are self-diagnosing as neurodivergent from kind of looking at their lives and what they're feeling and looking at how that matches up. And I think that one of the important things is that neurodivergence is now being shown as it actually is. So what I mean by that is when I was a lot younger, I remember the only reference to autism that I ever had was in a television program, and there was a severely autistic child who was nonverbal, who was rocking, who was showing a great challenge in kind of interacting with the world. And I remember looking at that, and that was the label, that was the picture I attributed to autism. It was nonverbal, rocking, inability to interact with the world. And of course, I am now diagnosed neurodivergent, autistic, and that was in my mid-50s. And of course, it was a big surprise to me because I didn't see any of that in myself. I had a miscomprehension of what neurodivergence was. And I think as professionals, we need to understand it. I'm in a lot of late diagnosis groups for neurodivergence. And within those late diagnosis groups, it's really interesting having discussions And usually, not always, but usually the person who is diagnosed late in life, there's nobody more surprised than they are that they are neurodivergent. It's like they'll go, wow, I've lived for 55 years and I never knew this. It now makes so much sense. They're so surprised. It's like, wow. But with there being more information, with there being more research, with there being better assessment tools for kind of identifying neurodivergence, with there being a more clearly defined picture of what neurodivergence is, more are owning it either as a self-diagnosis or looking down a formal diagnosis route. And they will come into your therapy room. They have been in your therapy room. That's kind of how it is. This is part of our world. And that's why it's important for us as counselors and psychotherapists, because if somebody is coming in with a slightly different operating system, they come in with their Mac operating system, the last thing we want to be doing is offering them Windows-based solutions and programs to run and not recognizing where they're coming from because it might not work for them. They might feel unheard, unseen. And as is the case with many neurodivergent individuals, they can find that therapy didn't work for me. They didn't really get me, or it didn't work for me. And I'm asking the question, did it not work, or were they maybe not seen for who they are? And I don't know the answer to that. And I think that's what makes this such an interesting topic, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I can speak to that. If we kind of go to the overstretched analogy of the computer systems that we've been using, it takes time to adapt to a new operating system. So I converted from using Windows to a Mac about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was a huge learning curve. And I had to do a lot of CPD around it to be able to be effective using a Mac. So, if you're working with a neurodivergent client and you haven't got that training or that understanding, then you're going to be in the same position as I was, trying to work out why the icons were on the right-hand side and not the left-hand side, and where everything was and how it worked, and the fact that I couldn't find anything. Once I'd done that CPD, and once I'd done that training, and once I'd accepted that Macs and PCs were totally different, kind of environments, I can work between the two quite easily now. If I can use a PC, I can use a Mac, no problem at all. And I think, using that analogy, it speaks to what therapists really need to be thinking about. And as you say, Ken, some people don't know they're neurodivergent. Some people will come to the therapy room and it'll be unknown to both you and your client. But if you understand maybe that when the client's after a session, client might be a Mac, not a PC, then you can start adapting your practice to that. You don't have to say, "Oh, I think you're a Mac." I think you're autistic, but you can develop your practice. And I'll give you one example of that. It might be someone comes and they say, "I really don't like bright lights. I really struggle with bright lights." You could just adapt your practice and shut the curtains or shut the blinds. And you may want to put that in your contract. If you have difficulty with light, then we could operate in an environment where we can close the curtains. Or you might want a specific time to come in for therapy. We can work with that. So it's about being flexible, and it's about understanding that people are different. But as I say, to use the overused analogy of the Mac, you really need how to understand how the operating system works, or at least a working idea of how to use it. Because if you can't, you'll just stumble. And I think that's what happens with therapists. They just stumble. They're not deliberately trying to disadvantage the clients. They just don't know, and they just make mistakes.
That's okay. And that's okay not to know. It really is. I mean, it's that's why we do CPD. We see this, Rory and I see this topic as really important. I guess both being neurodivergent, it's an important topic. I know what it was like pre my diagnosis. I know the stories I told myself and why my life was the way it is and how different that is now. It's almost freeing, but also there's quite a journey that one goes on through diagnosis, which I've undertaken. And we want to share this topic with you. We're going to be bringing it for the next few weeks and deep diving into things like Rory has just touched on, making reasonable adjustments, knowing what kind of signs or presentations we might see that may indicate that a person might be neurodivergent. Of course, we're not there to diagnose. That's not what this is about. A client may even come in and say, you know what, I've just been diagnosed and I'm now trying to adapt my life. It may be a client coming in and saying, you know what, I think I might be, and I wonder what you think of that. And you can work through emotions with them as they maybe go through a formal diagnosis. So it might be a family member, somebody coming in and a family member is neurodivergent and speaking about that and giving us opportunity for areas to serve and help. So it's an important topic. We look forward to bringing it to you. Today has just been an intro, an overview, talking about why we're bringing this topic. We've got lots to bring on it. And if you're, of course, interested in training formally, we do have a certificate in working with autistic clients, and you can get information on that by just going to counsellingtutor.com. So there it is. That's our ethical, sustainable practice and start of a brand new shiny topic, Rory. We now move on to Practice Matters, where you met up with Ellie Finch. Ellie's been a real good long-term friend of Counselling Tutor, and this topic, it is so of the now. Using digital tools in an online therapy session. So many of us now working blended. You know, maybe we're doing a little bit of online work. How can we bring more value to that? Rory, tell me about this chat that you had.
Yeah, well, we really are pleased to welcome back Ellie, who will be sharing her insights on creative ways to work online using digital tools such as sandboxes. And she really recently discussed these methods, as you say, in her lecture for the CPD library. I caught up with her, and this is what she had to say.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
The world of online therapy has really now come of age. Since the COVID epidemic of the 2020s, people now are used to working online, which means a huge shift has taken place in the type of tools or activities that usually were quite easily accessible in a face-to-face environment, but provided a bit more of a challenge in a virtual environment. So I'm delighted to welcome Ellie Finch. She's been on the podcast before, who's done a fantastic lecture in the Counsellor CPD Library on the use of a digital sand tray. So Ellie Finch, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Rory.
So the first thing is, I guess there is a bit of a challenge, isn't there, that moving from face-to-face environments to online environments means that the tools that therapists used to use may not be easily replicated or easily available. I'm thinking of things like cards. I'm thinking of all sorts of things, sand trays, any materials that people use. But what you've done is you've developed a whole new way of working, I think, online. So just tell me a little bit about what led you to developing these ideas and where that idea came from.
I guess I wouldn't like to take the credit for developing it all, but I definitely have embraced it wholeheartedly. I think what's happened with me is my personal kind of situation made me really like primed and ready to embrace digital tools and online work. Because when COVID started back in 2020, I'd already led quite a sort of restricted life because my daughter's got some additional needs, and our life was quite kind of restricted already. So when COVID happened, it kind of didn't change that much for us, but what did change was that people were really open to using all these digital tools, working online. Came across the Counselling Tutor course on working online and did that and loved it. And I realized that it was the time to use video games and digital sand trays. And these were all things that were in my mind and I hadn't fully integrated into my practice yet. And it just made absolute sense. I was faced with clients. I work with a lot of young people, children, especially, but adults as well. And it was just, it was very bland being in little boxes and on Zoom and just trying to find creative ways to work. And it just made absolute sense to me to start using digital tools like video games and digital sand trays in my work to provide something really accessible and engaging to my clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's interesting because that kind of move into the digital realm may actually suit some clients more than others. I'm thinking of maybe younger people who've grown up with digital tools, who've grown up with the Facebooks and the Twitters. That ages me a bit. It's called X now, isn't it? And the TikToks of this world. So there's something, I guess, for me about it being familiar. When you work online, is that something that's very helpful in therapy? That when using things that are familiar, the internet and digital tools is helpful maybe for younger clients?
Yeah, I think it definitely is speaking their language and bringing therapy into their comfort zone. And it's not necessarily all, like some children and young people aren't interested in this way of working, but a lot are. And I think as sort of older therapists, we may feel a bit less comfortable in that space. Not all, like some people might be really into that stuff, but I think generally there's a kind of gap between the young clients and the older, and I'm kind of counting myself in that, who aren't. There's this phrase, isn't there, digital native, who maybe aren't digital natives, and I think we don't have to put people in those boxes necessarily because everyone embraces different things in their lives, but I think it is about meeting people in their comfort zone wherever we can, and in any way with our clients, and whatever that is, whatever it is their interests are, and how their brains work, and what makes them spark and engage with things, right? Absolutely,
and our work is all about connection. It's all about meeting the client where they are. And it's quite interesting what you said about older therapists. I guess I would fit into that band of older therapists. Time we record this podcast, I'm 66 now, which makes me positively ancient to anybody who's under 14. But I've embraced the digital world, and you don't have to do a lot. If you're working online, you don't have to do a lot. I think if you're online, you've already if you're using video platforms like we're recording this interview on, you've already crossed quite a big threshold, I think, because you've probably set your camera up, you probably set your microphone up, you know what the data protection is, so you've done a lot of that work. It isn't a great jump then to thinking, well, what digital tools that can be used, and just talk through. I mean, you show this really well in the lecture that you gave. And there's also 3 case studies that are in video form that show it being used. But just start us off with, what are the benefits of using a sandbox in general in therapy, just in case people aren't aware of the benefits of a sandbox. What is a sandbox, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, you can call it a sandbox or a sand tray, and this is a lovely in a traditional in-person work, you'd have a box with sand in. You could also put other kind of like some people put lentils in or something if people don't like the feeling of sand, and you have all these miniatures and items, and what it enables is a non-verbal way of expressing yourself. So, and it doesn't rely on creative talent either. So some people might be very kind of put off by the idea of needing to paint or draw or use clay in a creative therapy session, but you having already, it's like almost like making a collage or something where you've already got the miniature items of figures that you can place in the sand and start creating scenes and express yourself without needing to feel like you need some special talent or needing to use words. And it can really help then for the therapist to understand what's going on in someone's world, in their mind, and what's happening for them.
Yes, and I know when I've used figures in therapy, one of the interesting things is that it's not about kind of therapists. I mean, sure, there are therapists who might analyse the positioning of figures in a sand tray, but it's about asking the client what it means to them, isn't it? Yeah. So just talk us through. Someone's made the figures, they've put them in groups or whatever. How would you work with that? How would you observe what they've done? What would your interaction be with a client?
So I demonstrate in those role plays a bit, I think. So I would be asking them, I might ask them to, so we don't have to sort of say, oh, who does that represent or what does that represent? You can start just saying, what's this? They might have put a horse in there, and you go, what's this horse thinking or doing, and what are they about to do? Or you can start sort of really engaging with the scene in its own right and exploring that with them, so that it kind of isn't so. It kind of almost adds that kind of. I don't know what quite the word is. So like maybe a protective element where you're not talking so clearly about some actual situation in their life, but it can be used as metaphor. It can be used as a way of exploring something without it being so directly spoken about as well, I would say. Yes,
and I guess also sometimes it's useful for people who don't really want to talk too much. They can just confirm and say, it's helpful. I think not every client. We talk about talking therapy, but not every client wants to speak, do they?
No. And I think this is it. This is why I love using digital sand trays and video games, because it doesn't rely on that. Things. You have experiences together. In video games, you have clients can express themselves just by selecting items and placing them in the sand tray, and that could be all they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it can be therapeutic just to do that, to make your own sand tray as a therapist is a really lovely thing to do, because you can take a moment for yourself and you can go, what is it that's going on for me? And what does it look like if I choose things without thinking too much about it and putting them in a sand tray?
Yeah. So maybe that's one for supervision, when you're choosing your sand tray or choosing your digital sand tray, it's supervision. Are there any kind of practical considerations in terms of choosing online tools, such as data protection? How it captures data. Can you talk us through what decisions you might have to make when looking? I know you've demonstrated a particular tool in the lecture, but what considerations do you need to think about regarding client and data protection?
Yeah, absolutely. There really is things to consider, and I think it some people might sort of like rush off and start using digital tools without thinking these things, and so it's important to raise awareness of them. And it's also, some people might be kind of almost held back because they're worried about doing things wrong, and I think that's also something that I want to encourage people to kind of know that they just need to take these things into consideration, and they can use digital tools. So data protection, like you said, is really important. Complying with the data protection regulations for where you're based. So in the UK it's GDPR, and in the US it's HIPAA compliance, and making sure that you are thinking about things like if about where if any data is stored by the application you're using. And I do go into that really quite meticulously in the lecture. I've got a lovely document that I've created, it's lovely, I love it, and it's got all the things about privacy policies for each app, and if they're storing any data, where it might be stored. So you need to think about that if you're based in the UK. If there's data stored in the US, you need to think about that carefully and let your clients know. So what's really important is getting your clients informed consent if you're going to use these tools. So giving them the information they need, and the information about any limitations around data protection or the location of where any data is stored by the app, and making sure that they are aware of that before they give their consent to use it, and also thinking about security elements as well. So I use video games a lot, so it's really quite important to me that I make sure that people don't use the in-game chat and things like that, because you can use your usual video platform instead.
Yes.
So yeah, it's really important to think about those things, and I have, so what I have actually is, like, for my counselling agreement, I have like a menu of applications, and what I provide in the digital sound training is almost like a starter of that, really, as this kind of information for my clients so that they can be informed about what they're using in our sessions.
Yes, we love a good document.
Yeah.
Here at Counselling Towers, certainly one that clients can understand, and I think the key here is informed consent. The worry with AI is that it scrapes people's information, and once it's on the servers, you can't get it off. Yeah,
and you want to make sure that you're really thinking about any data that they're inputting into the application, like their email address, things like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and location, I guess, things like location, and there's so much that modern technology kind of scrapes from you, isn't it? What did you have for lunch? That type of thing.
Yeah, you want to be really mindful of it, but also not it's just not being put off by it, isn't it? And also just kind of, making sure you're informed so that you can inform your clients, do it in a way that's age appropriate, and making sure that they're aware of these
and this
things.
Is all covered in your lecture. You cover this in your lecture. Now, the main lecture is about the digital sound tray, but when I went in to look at the lecture, I was absolutely delighted, I think is the word, to find that it wasn't just your lecture. There's 3 other videos of you doing demonstrations or application of digital tools. Just speak a little bit about that.
Oh yeah, I really thought it was very important. So in the lecture, I go over, there's 9 digital sound trays that I give everyone the kind of guide to, really. But what I wanted to do is make sure that people had a sense of, and I really spell it out. It's not the way to use a digital sound tray. It's a way, right? It's just the way I use it and the way I used it with that particular person in that session that you see. So, but it's just a sort of starting point for people to go, oh, this might be possible for me. This might be possible for my clients. And so my colleague Rika and I did a role play in Rethinkly, which used to be called ProReal, which is an avatar-based software which can be used like a digital sound tray. And we did it in Simply Sound Play as well, which is a lovely digital sound tray that's very accessible for therapists and clients, I feel, to use. So we did role plays in that, and it was really nice because in the actual lecture, we just got little snippets, but I was able to make 2 longer versions of it. And at the end, Rika actually, as herself, reflects back on what it was like to use a digital sound tray, which is really interesting to hear. And I also did 2 role plays with some young actors, a mother and daughter pair as a family, and a young teenage boy using a digital sound tray in Minecraft, which I've created with my colleague Dan Noble. So I did some role plays with those actors so that we could demonstrate the sound tray therapy world in Minecraft as well.
I mean, I have to say, it's one of the most comprehensive lectures. It's almost well, it is some of it is actually, I would say, in the training sphere, and people can watch that, and it really is. I was mesmerised by it because it's not an area that I use digital sound trays and that type of thing, but I was absolutely mesmerised by it. And I guess one of the things I took away from it was it might sound daunting initially, But actually, once you understand the mechanisms of it, which is very, very straightforward. And as I said, if you're working online, you're already halfway there, because you could use a computer, you could use the audio, you could connect to the internet. You're really more than halfway there. Just taking that extra step can add so much value, I think, to the client's experience.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And what I did purposely was start with the 2D, really simple sand trays. There's one called the Online Sand Tray by Dr. Karen Freed. And that's just online, it's free, and it's a link that you can send to your client. They can use it at their end, and the data, as far as I'm aware, gets just stored on their on their computer locally, and it's very simple to use. It's just drop and move, and you can just get started with that, obviously still with informed consent. But and I also made this, which I'm really excited about, this button activity where I think I explain it in the sand tray, but that's what you were talking about earlier, where how do you translate these traditional tools that we use to online work? And I remember literally having my button tray or physical buttons up at the camera, and I'm showing Rory how I did it with my hands now. I go, which one is it? Which one? The blue one? I don't know. So I made this button activity so people can use this activity digitally, and just, it's a PowerPoint. It's free. I've got it on my website. When people subscribe to my mailing list, it's like a free gift, and it's just this lovely thing that's very easy to use. It's a PowerPoint that you can share with your clients, and they can move the buttons around, select one that represents them or their family members, and start using that. Yeah,
and when you're talking to buttons, you're not talking about click buttons. What you're talking about is buttons that fasten your clothes, aren't you?
You're right. Yeah, like lovely, pretty, different shapes, rough or text, like buttons, all those different buttons that could represent us in different ways.
I have to say, I was completely blown away by the lecture. I mean, all our lectures produced incredible helpful materials, but this one, I think, more than ever, because just because of the sheer scale of how much you've put in, and the demonstrations is absolutely marvellous. If you're interested in the work that Ellie does, if you go to Counselling Tutor and look at the podcast tab, counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, look at episode 315. We're going to put some links into our website so you can know a little bit more about Ellie and her work, and just who you are and what you do. And as we come to the end of this interview, what do you hope that people will take away from your lecture?
Well, I hope they feel empowered to start using them and find the one that would suit them. It's really important that it suits you as a therapist, and also your clients, of course. And just have a little practice with a colleague. Have a go, if you're using it online, have a go at doing what you need to do, like maybe screen sharing, or them screen sharing, your client screen sharing from there, and have a go as the client, have a go as the therapist, and just have a play and see that. I think what the thing is really important, is seeing that actually you're just going to be using your honed normal therapy skills just in this other space. It's not like you have to learn anything new in that way. You're transferring them over to the digital world, and you know what you're doing.
Fantastic. The lecture is in the library now. Using the Digital Sand Tray by Ellie Finch is in the Counsellor CPD library, along with the other videos that have practical demonstrations, and of course that reflection by someone who's role-playing the clients at the end. So it just leaves me to say, Ellie Finch, thank you so much for joining us.
Big thank you to Ellie Finch. Big thank you to you, Rory, holding those important discussions, bringing us the CPD. And of course, if you enjoyed what Ellie has just been speaking about with Rory, as Rory has said, you can get that lecture in the Counselling Tutor CPD CPD library. That is for qualified professionals only. And if you are a member of that, log in and you will see that lecture is there in recently added lectures. If you're not a member of the Counsellor CPD library, just go to counsellingtutor.com. For less than the price of a cup of coffee per month, you can have access to hundreds and hundreds of hours of top quality CPD that makes a difference in your practice from the top experts that we rub shoulders with here at Counselling Tutor. So that was Practice Matters. We now move into recognizing you, our students, in Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting, and it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counsellingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, such an important topic, developing an emotional vocabulary as a counsellor. And it's a skill, really, isn't it, Rory?
It is, and we've all heard that cliche that therapists kind of laugh about with when the client tells you something and you go, "How do you feel about that?" And it's one, I think everybody thinks that therapists say that, and I'm sure some do. But also, I think when you're developing your skills palette, certainly during training, it's really good to know what emotions are. You can name the emotions. And also, I think sometimes the most helpful intervention is where in the reflection you say, you seem really happy about that. And sometimes clients don't really know what their emotions are. I was a skilled counsellor for many years, and I was one of the things that really struck me working with young people was that some of them didn't have an emotional vocabulary, and they would have grown up to be adults without an emotional vocabulary. And as a therapist, just pointing out how the client's presenting or the person you're working with in your skills, and you say, well, look, when you talk about it, you look really happy. If they are happy, that can be really useful because that might be something out of the awareness of the person that you're working with. You go, yeah. You might go, yeah, I actually am very happy at that. And I remember for my own therapy, I was talking about a subject, and this person said, my therapist said, "You're really angry about that, aren't you?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not angry." And then she kind of looked at me. It's like, yeah, I think I am angry. And I didn't realize how angry I was about it. So naming emotions can be really, really useful. So I guess the first port of call is to understand what emotions are, give them the names, and be understanding of that. And there's lots of resources that we could point to that will give you like an emotions wheel where emotions are shown and what they really mean. And, I talk about anger as the emotion, but that's a secondary emotion because anger is usually a bodyguard of primary emotions such as shame or fear or uncertainty. If you meet someone who's angry, usually they're either ashamed or they're frightened underneath that. So developing as a student a vocabulary of emotions and being able to not only share them back to a client and say, you sound, but also, in the reflection from yourself, when I hear that, I feel very sad. Is so useful because it gives a context to the story the client's telling us. It is literally the music behind the words.
Yes. It's such an important topic, and I've got so much happening in my head at the moment that I need to slow myself down as we kind of go into this, because I see this as so valuable for us as counselors and psychotherapists. So here's the thing. We're not taught, at least in the Western world, during our schooling, or at least I wasn't, and maybe it's changed considerably since I was schooled, but we're not taught about our emotions, how to regulate our emotions, what our emotions are. And we end up going into the world with very basic words. I'm happy today, I'm sad today, I'm angry today. We can name those very, very basic emotions. But of course, emotions are nuanced. They are nuanced, you know. So what understanding emotional vocabulary is for us as counselors and psychotherapists is to be able to go beyond the word happy, sad, and angry, to bring in variants of that. Because angry, are they angry? Are they absolutely livid? Are they wanting to explode? There's variations of that. Are they frustrated? You know, there's different variations that sit under the same kind of word or same kind of emotion. There's almost like a little volume control that works with that. You know, are you happy or are you jubilant today? Are you, you know,
Ecstatic.
Ecstatic. You know, there's different words. Now, why this is important is because counseling is based on the relationship. We know that. And it's based on the client bringing in where they're at, what's happening in their life, and they're sharing this with a fellow human being that starts off as stranger, but trust builds up. And where the real magic happen is where the fellow human being, which is you, the counselor, really hears them, really sees them, and feeds something back where the client goes, yes, it's like that, you get me. And you can see and feel the change in the energy of that person, where they've been recognized, where they've been seen. Now, very often, the emotion that person may be feeling within inside their body, they don't have a word for it because we weren't taught that vocabulary. So us as the counselor having a broader vocabulary that we can attribute to emotions and kind of put some words in to let the client find the one that best fits and resonates with them, increases their vocabulary, but more importantly, it shows that we truly understand how that person is feeling. And therein is relational depth. That's when the real magic happens. Yeah. That's when the trust goes to that next level. It is so important. I have to throw in, because we spoke in the beginning about neurodivergence and understanding what that is. There is a condition that falls under the neurodivergent umbrella, and it is called alexithymia. And it is a term that describes a problem with interpreting or actually feeling emotions. It comes from Greek and loosely translate to no words for emotions. We've got podcasts on this. We're going to be discussing it more in depth of how we might work in that kind of a situation where the client just doesn't have the ability to be able to tune in and feel their emotions. So we're going to recognize that. We're going to park that for now. We're going to go back to those that can feel and do see their emotions. But I think it's important in recognition of our new topic of neurodivergence to kind of put that out there. So I'm going to go through some common emotions. I'm just going to throw some words in here. We're going to give you links for these, and we're also going to give you a free download of a feelings wheel, which is really helpful. Feelings wheels kind of have a lot of different feelings on a wheel linked to the base emotion. So if we're talking about anger, it might be hostile. You know, you might feed back and say, wow, you were feeling really hostile in that kind of a situation. Agitated, jealous, contemptuous. That's a big word. I wouldn't know what that meant, but there it is. It's under anger. Sadness, shame, disheartened, hopeless, agonized. You know, different words for the same kind of thing. If somebody is fear, they may anxious, mortified, overwhelmed, hysterical, love, appreciative, compassionate, joy, tranquil, amused, jubilant, content. So there's just a few words that we can throw in to give just more meaning, more depth to the emotions that we describe and the emotions we work with. This is our work. We're working with emotions, people's feelings. Knowing words to attribute to that is just an asset to you as a counsellor.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about empathic attunement. And, if you think about tuning a radio in, we've all done this probably, use a radio dial to tune in a radio station. You tune it in and it's slightly off frequency and it's a bit grating. You can still hear it, but it's a bit grating. And then you twist that little wheel a little bit more and all of a sudden it becomes crystal clear, high fidelity, sharp. And it's like, yes, there's the joy. That's it. And that's what it's like to be heard by a therapist, as opposed to maybe a friend who talks in very vague terms. He's slightly off that frequency. But when you go see a therapist, the therapist tunes into you, gets really crystal clear on the frequency of what your emotions are. And it's the same feeling. It's like, yes, I feel heard. I feel that someone's tuned into me. And I think that's so important. And, we forget that many people who come to therapy, people may not even switch the radio on. People may not be listening at all. They may not even be touching the tuning in dial. So it's really important that when clients meet us, we meet them where they're at, and we may not be able to get exactly there, but we can get so close to their frame of reference that they feel understood. It's almost as if the person who's speaking to them can read their mind. And how many times as therapists have we worked with a client and really accurate reflection of an emotion, and they've said, it's like reading my mind, it's like magic, this. And it's not magic, it's the developing that attunement through the use of emotional language. And that's the skill right there. That's the advanced counselling skill, to be able to pick exactly the frequency the client's on, tune into it so it's crystal clear reception.
So there's the outcome for you, that crystal clear reflection. And the big question is how? So I've got the feelings wheel in front of me here, and we'll share this in the show notes. So make sure you just go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 315. You're going to be able to download your feelings wheel, have that to reference. But it's not about looking at all the words on the feelings wheel and going, right, I've got to remember them. Here we go. I'm going to remember this one and this one and this one. I'm telling you now, there's hundreds and hundreds of words on the feeling wheel. There really are. And you'll see kind of as it spreads out. So if we take angry, then one out from angry might be bitter. It might be mad. Another one out might be depressed, betrayed, provoked, so there's different levels of it. Also, if somebody comes in saying, I'm really feeling provoked by my partner or my colleague, we might be able to link in and say, wow, feels like anger behind that, because we know that word sits in that emotional slice on the wheel. And that's the one side of it, is kind of learning those words. But there's more to it than that. As is so often the case in counselling and psychotherapy, it's not just about learning the theory. There's a practice element and a self-development element. And this is the important part here. So if you're journaling, and if you're a student, and this is, of course, in our student services section, during your journey as a student, you'll probably be asked to journal on a daily basis of where you're at. And that is where you get to start looking at your emotions and putting words to your emotions, and really take some time when you're journaling, go, well, I had that situation today, that was really frustrating for me. And then go, well, okay, what was frustrating? Where did I feel that? Was it in my chest? Was it in my tummy? Was it kind of midway? Was it just in my head? What was happening for me? Is it frustration? Can I find a different word? Let me look at my feelings wheel. Oh, that word there feels a little bit better. And we develop our own vocabulary. So we can't be there for another with their emotions if we don't understand our emotions. The client can always only go as far as the counsellor can go. So if we are not able to, at some level, interpret and understand our own emotions, how can we then be there with somebody else in their emotions truly empathically? I guess that's the question. So emotional journaling, be patient. Be patient with yourself as you're exploring your own emotions. And if you're working in skills practice and you want to try kind of naming emotions, be patient with yourself that you may call it wrong. It's wonderful when we call it wrong. You know, if you go, oh, that seems like it makes you really angry, the person might go, actually, no. I think I was just more frustrated. It gives us a great opportunity to make sure that our frame of reference is aligned. When you go for your own counselling, when you go for your own personal counselling as a student, which is required, certainly in the UK on the courses we run here, there's an opportunity to look at your emotions, hear how another professional might name them, to see how you can name them in a healthy way within the sessions. Try it in your skills practice. If you're going in with an emotion from the car drive on the way and the person that cut in front of you that you basically want to get out the car and hit their car with a big baseball bat, think, how am I gonna word that, and how can I describe that emotion, and how does that get reflected back to me? So there's, I guess, some thoughts around how you might develop that emotional vocabulary is the word I'm looking for, Rory.
Yeah,
I've run out
that's
of
another
words.
that's another big word neither of us can spell.
I know.
And you are absolutely right. And it's amazing that, you know, we think we've got a whole palette of emotions, and a lot of us have. Some people may have it more defined than others, but I'm always amazed, even nowadays, where people, you know, certainly when I was practicing, people would come and the anger emotion was something that was almost forbidden. Society tends to say, "Oh, you can't be angry, you shouldn't be angry," and of course, it is another emotion. It is an emotion. The outcomes, the behaviour around anger can cause difficulties, but being angry in itself is a relevant and, you know, just emotion. And it's amazing how many people, when you reflect anger back, or the, you know, the kind of hidden pieces behind anger, such as maybe jealousy or fear, or they sometimes takes a bit for them to be able to own that, because society doesn't like to have angry people. Yeah, anger is an emotion. So I think there is some area in therapy of teaching people their emotions, and also making sure all emotions are available. I had a colleague many years ago who used to say, "You can be as angry as you want in the therapy room as long as you don't trash me or the room." That was in her contract, and how helpful for someone who is scared of showing that emotion. So very important that we understand the panoply of emotions and our own. We can't be there for others unless we have a good understanding of how to turn that tuning wheel on the emotional frequency scale for ourselves. We can't do it for ourselves. We can't do it for others.
I really love how you've kind of brought in what is so important here, and it's the acceptance of the emotion. You know, maybe if you think about introjected values, or the lens, the lens that the client may be looking at the world through, they may have been shown at a younger age that certain emotions are just not shown. You do not show that. That is not appropriate in the world. No, anger, we'll take that as an example. And the truth is, we all experience anger. We all experience these emotions. It is the human condition. And it's interesting to me that almost in society, there are certain emotions are welcome. If you're happy, proud, accepted, respected, valued, creative, loving. I'm reading these from the feeling wheels. All of those. Oh yeah, that's me. I'm all of those things, because those are the good emotions. Fearful, anxious, weak, rejected, threatened. How do those words feel? Are you as comfortable with those as you are with the happy emotions? is your client. Has your client been told to swallow those down or been taught by the world? We don't talk about that. We don't show anger. If you think about anger, like you say, Rory, it's a base emotion we all share. But it has the connotation. If I think anger, I don't think it's not a big leap to anger management, a special class where you go to learn to not be angry. Which, of course, that's not what anger management's about. No. If anybody's ever been on it.
No, it's not.
But we may have clients that are coming in that the emotion is not acceptable to themselves. Us naming the emotion, accepting that emotion without judgment, saying it's Absolutely. Okay to feel that emotion. Wow. It's powerful stuff, this. Just being able to speak about and understand emotions.
It is. And I think I'd like to add in, when we talk about acceptable emotions, those are the emotions we think may be acceptable. But I've certainly worked with clients who've told that being happy isn't acceptable.
Yeah.
I've worked with some clients whose family or maybe their community have told them that happiness is, a sin or shouldn't be. You shouldn't be happy. Certainly, I know in my family, one side of our family, that was projected a lot onto the children. That you shouldn't be. There's nothing to be happy for. In other words, if I'm miserable, then everybody else should be miserable. And I've certainly worked with clients where, we've talked about what happiness looks like for them because it's not something they've ever had permission to have. So don't fall into the trap of thinking it's only one emotion that can be verboten or forbidden.
Yeah.
There are others. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's whatever lens that person has from their own phenomenological experience of life and the stories that they've built up about what is accepted and what is not acceptable to self. Yeah. And I guess that brings us full circle on our emotions wheel here to where you can get this download. Go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast episode, or the podcast tab, find episode 315 right there. You'll be able to download your feelings wheel. We'll also link to a lovely article that Rory used to reference this chat that we've had here called 5 Helpful Ways to Grow Your Emotional Vocabulary. It's really nice. I think you'll enjoy that. And that kind of brings us to the end of student services, and sadly, I'm almost at a loss here, Rory, to the end of episode 315 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. The National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, or NCPS, proudly sponsor this podcast, supporting students every step of the way. Join the NCPS for resources, training, and a friendly, knowledgeable community to enhance your learning experience. Visit ncps.com.
So we started off with ethical sustainable practice, and we looked at neurodivergence, the growing edge of people who see the world differently, and how we need as therapists to adapt to those operating systems, to adapt to the fact that people may think or view the world in a completely different way to the way we view the world. On to Practice Matters, we caught up again with our good friend Ellie Finch, who talked about using digital tools in an online therapy session. And of course, she was talking about a fantastic lecture that she's produced for the CPD Library for Qualified Therapists. And then finally, in student services, a walk down the emotional lane of life, where Ken and myself talked about how to develop an emotional vocabulary as a counselling skill. And don't forget that free download. And just a little favour from Rory. If you cut off, or Rory, if you like this episode, why don't you share it with your peers or people who may find this helpful? And if you could leave us a bit of a review on your podcast platform, be it iTunes or Podchase or whichever podcast platform you use, that'd be lovely. It makes it all worthwhile. But me and Ken can have a look at them and think that at least someone out there is appreciative of the work that we put in. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.